we have worked closely with Betsy over the last month to in planning this today's presentation, and we're so grateful for Betsy's enthusiasm and commitment to getting the word out and sharing this information about one of the biggest factors contributing to climate change. We also want to thank Bill Wilson, king of bird-friendly coffee, who as an incentive wanted to offer all of us today a bag of coffee from Birds and Beans, and you'll hear more about that at the end of the session and how to sign up and get your coffee.
That's why I'm here.
You're ready? You're ready for that? Just a few words now about the Zoom guidelines for this meeting. Again, we're recording. If you don't care to be recorded, please turn off your video. And if you want to rename yourself, but everyone looks like they have a good name, we ask that you keep yourself muted during the presentation. And if you have questions, even though we're a small group, if you do have questions, write them up in the chat. And we're going to then review all the questions at the end of the session and be able to then do questions and answers after Betsy presents. We have an agenda, and the agenda, Kent's going to put that up just so you know where we're going. We've got about an hour and 15 minutes. We want to hear from, we're going to hear a reading by Julie, and then Sylvia will give us a report on how the bell ringing is going on the 11th hour of the 11th day. And then we'll hear our presentation, and we have time to discuss, and then we'll hear about next steps. So I think that's it in the way of introduction. I'll hand it over to Julie, who's going to remind us why we all are called to this work.
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you all for being here. I just like the idea that I picture us all working pretty hard day and night on our environmental action that we choose as best we can. And this is a reading from a book that I've been enjoying that I think reminds us about how exhausting it can be, and a meditation in how to keep going and why you must. No letters to your congressional representative tonight. No second cup of shade-grown coffee. No web search for rates of ice cap melting or declining numbers of polar bears. Turn off your lights and go outside. Shut the door behind you. Maybe rain has fallen all evening, and the moon, when it emerges between the clouds, glows on the flooded streets and silhouettes of leafless maple trees along the curb. Maybe the tide is low under the docks in the warehouses, and the air is briny with kelp. Starlings may roost in a row in the rain of the supermarket, on the rim of the supermarket, their wet backs blinking red and yellow as neon lights flash behind them. In the gutter, the same lights redden small pressure waves that build and break against crescents of fallen leaves. So let the reliable rhythms of the moon and the tides reassure you. Let the smells return memories of other seas and times. Let the reflecting light magnify your perception. Let the rhythm of the rushing water flood your spirit. Walk and walk until your heart is full. Then you will remember why you try so hard to protect this beloved world and why you must.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. We're going to hear from Sylvia now about the wonderful work that she's been champion of for the last year. Sylvia, let's hear how we're doing.
Well, we're doing pretty well. I would say more championing than actual action, but I make it about 7 or 8 months that we've been ringing the bell on the 11th day at 11 o'clock. The 11th day of every month at 11 o'clock. We've had groups of 3 almost always up in the belfry, ringing the bell. A very dedicated troop, very enthusiastic pair of ringers, Amanda and Chris. They are just thrilled with it, and their little son Gideon has been helping too. And several of us, I think the smallest group we've had is 2 and the largest is 4. It would be nice if more people would come just to, cheer everybody on and hold signs, but we have quite a few signs, and I've put strings on them and we hang them on the gate outside on the fence. I have been in touch with a few other churches, and I'm kind of regularly in touch with them. The only ones that have actually done it themselves that I know of are the First Church people. And we had a lovely time with them on the discussion of the plastic wars. I'm preaching to the choir here. You all know all this stuff, except I guess, well, maybe not all of you, but anyway, let me go on.
No, let me interrupt and introduce my friend Howard, because Howard and I have been friends for many years, and I'm sure the rest of you are wondering who he is. And Howard, I won't take time to introduce the King's Chapel people, but they welcome you.
How do you do, Howard?
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to see you all.
So I'm really preaching to you right now.
Okay.
Anyway,
I'm all ears.
And I think that we are slowly building relationships with these other churches. But I think the most enthusiastic, apart from First Church and Old South Church, have been my seniors group here in the South End. There's a flurry of stuff going. I forwarded Betsy's email today, the thing that you sent to us for us to sign and send about the tall buildings, the big buildings. Anyway, I sent it to all of them and we talked about it at great length, and I've had many emails back, and they want me to warn them or remind them the next time it's almost the 11th. So probably I'll start reminding them a week ahead, because they want to blow horns and stuff on their front porches, and some of them belong to Jewish congregations, and they're going to spread the word. So that gives me so much heart, because sometimes you just strike a gold mine and then the thing spreads. It's like ripples, and that's what we're looking for, is the ripples, I think. So can anybody think of anything else I should say? Because I don't want to take up a lot of time. I'm going to pursue Old South particularly. Trinity, it turns out, does have a climate action. I don't know how active they are, but they don't have a bell. But nevertheless, they're right across the square from Old South. And so if they would get out on their front porch and bang on things, there could be at least noise. And they're up the street from First Church. So if we can get that bunch making noise, it'll be great.
Thank you, Sylvia. I do want to say that you were on the invitation letter to the First Church of Stowe and Acton, where Dick and I live. And they rang the bells on the 11th as part of a fair that they were having, Make a Difference Day, and little children sat at their tables making signs. And it's right in the center of town on a main road, and so everybody heard it. But Sylvia has really gotten the ball rolling, and we have materials that we can send to other churches and to encourage that. So next we want to hear about, Kent's going to tell us what we've got in store for the year ahead, because we've got a plan. We're moving forward.
We have a plan, and we have Cynthia. Cynthia is driving the plan, so all is well. We did a lot of discussing over the last year about what topics we should be focusing on, and these are the 3 that emerged, basically, as you see here: energy transition from fossil fuels, plastics recycling, zero waste, and food sustainable agriculture and composting. So we have a plan for this fall. Betsy Peterson speaking today. Dory Seavey is on October 21st, and we're working on a speaker for December 7th. And then the others, we've identified the themes and we'll be working out a program. But if any of you have ideas or want to help out, please let us know. Okay. So it's my pleasure to introduce Betsy Peterson, who's been working a lot with an organization called Mothers Out Front on the natural gas issues, and she's going to tell us a bit about the problem and also what Mothers Out Front are doing about the problem and how we can get involved. Over to you, Betsy. You're muted right now.
Does work better if I unmute. I understand that. So thank you, everybody. I want to start with other thank yous as well. I've lifted slides from Dory and from my neighbor, Ania Camargo, who is the person who got me started on this. And I've messed around with them, and I hope I haven't messed any of them up. Dory, if I have, you'll have to let me know. I'm also incredibly grateful to Kent Wittenberg, because I had never tried before to put together a PowerPoint, and it looked awful, but now it does. Now it looks, I think it looks great. Another disclaimer is that I'm new to this stuff. I have a great deal still to learn. These are very complicated matters, but the things I've learned, I think, have been so important that I'm happy to have this opportunity to share them with you. And there are even a few glimmers of hope. So I will try to make sure we get to those. Next slide, please. Oops, yeah, back to the lamp or the vent. I'm sorry, it's not a lamp. So many of us were brought up to think that natural gas was the cleanest and most reasonably priced option. It does burn less than, does release less CO2 than coal, but electricity is now a lot cheaper, and much of it is coming from renewable sources. The problem with gas is that it releases methane a lot more than anybody thought before. This is fairly recent science to appreciate how drastic the impact of methane is. It's bad for our health, it kills trees, and as you'll see, there are risks all along the distribution line. Next. Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. In a 20-year time frame, it is 85 times more powerful than carbon dioxide in capturing heat. And in Massachusetts, it's 30% of our greenhouse gas emissions. About half of that comes from burning gas in homes and businesses, and about half of it comes from leaks. And in fact, almost 3% of the gas distributed in Massachusetts just goes into the air, not anything useful. Next. Here's a glimmer of good news. Although methane is much worse than carbon dioxide in a 20-year time span, it does not last as long. Carbon dioxide lasts for hundreds of years, but methane will dissipate in about 10 years. And so that means that cutting methane could make a difference more quickly. These are comments from a report on this. I apologize, since I know you so well, I'll confess this is a story that was written before the UN report came out, but it's presumably still sound. A concerted effort to reduce methane could result in a 45% reduction by 2030. And it could reduce perhaps 0.3 degrees Celsius of global warming within the next 10 years. So that's staggering. If it could happen, it would take fossil fuel waste and agricultural sectors to address the issue, but it's still a goal that would be impressive. And then the chief author of the study says, although it's almost impossible to remove carbon dioxide, it's still urgent to remove carbon dioxide. The effects aren't going to show, we aren't going to see the benefits very quickly. But if we can make a big change in methane, we could see public health improvement in this decade and climate benefits within 2 decades. So that's really staggering information. Next, please. Where does fossil fuel come from? Deep in the ground, which is where it should stay. Here in Massachusetts, one of the things I was really dismayed to learn was that 80% of our gas in Massachusetts comes from fracking. I somehow had the innocent idea that because we weren't near anywhere fracking facilities, we weren't engaged in that very disruptive, damaging process, but it's not true. fracking. And that's actually one of the things that's changed. One of the reasons that gas is not as good a choice as it was many years ago. Some time ago, only 20% of the gas came from fracking. The rest of it was not as disruptive a process. So it wasn't as dirty in the past as it is now. Fracking requires huge amounts of water, often produces highly toxic and radioactive water. It's associated with contamination of surface and groundwater, air and noise pollution, micro earthquakes, all kinds of ecosystem damage, and a lot of damage to people. There are much higher incidences of many diseases with people who are living or working near fracking facilities. Next. And this, oh, the clouds aren't showing. This is a map of the process, but at one point it had, there come the clouds. Those are leaks being lost at almost every step of the distribution process. And the scary thing about the leaks is that you can't see them. Some of them are deliberate. Some of the facilities vent gas from time to time for reasons I don't begin to understand. But you can't see a gas leak, a methane leak, and so you don't know it's there unless you have special equipment to see it. And I did see a horrifying online story with pictures, infrared pictures of methane leaks. Next. We have a particular problem in Massachusetts, which is that many of our pipes are very, very old. And I can assure you that the picture on the top left is not fanciful. They happen to be replacing the gas main on the street I live on, Temple Street behind the State House. And I have seen pipes that look like that. And it's really horrifying to realize that's what's been bringing gas into our neighborhood. Next. How bad a problem is it in Boston to have gas leaks? This is a picture from 2015. This is nearly 3,400 leaks just in Boston, and Newton is even worse. Next. Another area of fairly recent understanding in science is the health effects of methane and natural gas. These, you can see there've been many articles, whoops, too soon. To published recently. And the distressing thing that another shocking thing I've learned recently is that there are studies suggesting that just cooking with a gas stove can be a health factor that hasn't been recognized. Some people believe that cooking, if you live in a household where the cooking is done with the gas stoves, it's like living with a smoker. Next. But here's another glimmer. There's sort of a combination of things happening on three particular fronts, in which makes it a particularly good time for the public to speak up. I'm sure everybody here knows about the climate roadmap that was passed, the goals that were established in Massachusetts last spring. And the city has goals too, and many towns have goals. There's important information coming soon from two fronts. One of them is a report by our own Dory Seavey. I will say more about that in a minute, but it's a report on the current gas enhancement program. And there are major issues ahead of us on that. And the other piece is that the utilities, by order of the Attorney General, are required to make reports describing how they will, and then the Department of Public Utilities will assess the role of the gas companies in ensuring a low carbon future. And finally, because the climate bill that has been passed doesn't say much about how to reach the goals, there are many important bills coming to the legislature, and some of them are very, very creative and they could have wonderful consequences if we can get them passed. Next. So this is just a summary of state and Boston goals. The climate roadmap mandates a 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from 1990 by 2030 and net zero by 2050. And the city of Boston has similar goals. It already established one. I guess the information isn't in yet on whether they met the 2020 goals, 50% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. So these are ambitious goals, but it's going to take a lot of creativity to figure out how to get there. And another piece of good news is there are just a lot of really smart people working very hard on these issues. Next. So Dory will tell us more about this subject in her report, but she's been studying the way the current arrangements for dealing with gas have been dealt with, and you can see there are problems. There's no clear success in lowering the leaks. It's very expensive. There are likely to be stranded assets. There are environmental justice issues because the people least able to pay are probably going to end up carrying the burden. And it doesn't help us get to the goals that the state has established. That report's going to be released on Thursday, right, Dory? And so keep your eyes open, keep your ears open to hear about it.
Next. We actually had to postpone the release, so we expect it to be the very beginning of October.
Okay, all right, but it will come out and it will be interesting. Thank you, Dory. Next slide. And then the other piece where there'll be more information soon is as the gas companies report to the Department of Public Utilities about their plans. They are required to engage an independent consultant in these discussions to prepare this report. And they are required to have a public process engaging stakeholders. I've talked to some of the stakeholders in those conversations, and they're discouraged about the limits of the gas companies' ambitions. The gas companies have some bad ideas, like using hydrogen, which is a very explosive gas. We don't want hydrogen in our homes. And there's a fact sheet on hydrogen prepared by the Gas Leaks Alliance, which we'll put in the resources on the website. And there are much better ideas like heat pumps and geothermal networks. Again, these are very complicated issues. But again, I think, as members of the public, I think our role is to be very simple about the priorities, that we want clean heat and we want environmental justice. Exactly what the mix is going to be and how we're going to get there is not something I can hope to understand. But then, what do you do about this if you're a citizen who can't possibly understand all the complicated issues? And there's so many organizations out there, it's hard to know how to use your energy. I had the good fortune to live across the street from Ania Camargo, who's been one of the moving spirits in Mothers Out Front. So let's go to the Mothers Out Front slide. She got me involved bit by bit. I had occasionally turned up for demonstrations and things in the past, or written legislators when she asked me to. But the more I've learned about Mothers Out Front, the more impressed I've been. They are a lot of smart people who care about using their time efficiently. It's a grassroots organization. Although it's called Mothers Out Front, they welcome everybody. There are quite a few men active in the organization. And that title kind of put me off, and they talk about moms a lot, but that's okay because they're worrying about the children's future. There are 22 chapters in Massachusetts, 4 of them in Boston. And there's some other states that have chapters too. They have excellent educational materials. They have many opportunities to take action. The downtown chapter has really been leading on the issues of gas leaks. They have members who have participated in drafting new legislation. They have, for the most part, one very good in a couple of meetings I've been in with legislators, it's clear that they have a great deal of respect for Mothers Out Front and the recommendations they make about which bills the legislators should pay attention to. And another thing that's admirable is that they choose one campaign as the major activity for each year. And this year it's clean heat, clean air. And part of that is a postcard and petition campaign. The link at the bottom is to get the petition online. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So next slide, please. This, you can't see it very well here, so we'll break it up for you. But this is one side of the flyer that goes along with the campaign. Next. So the first picture, of course, is dirty air. Just makes the simple statement that natural gas is dangerous and that the companies have to make a report. And this is the time to tell them what we want. And over on the left, right, on the right side, which you probably can't read, it just makes the illustration that heat from the earth is trapped by a blanket of greenhouse gases causing the temperature to rise. Next. And there's a picture of a nice clean city with blue skies and clear air and some of the reminders of tools that can help us get there, like renewable electricity, networked ground source heat pumps, and heat pumps in general. Next. I know you can't read this, but it kind of summarizes quickly the priorities as Mothers Out Front has defined them. Asking your gas utility to align their plan with the future of clean heat platform, increasing use of electricity, affordability for all, safe, clean, and healthy. And also, importantly, plans to retrain gas workers so that they will be able to get decent jobs. And then the second part of the platform is that it won't rely on natural gas. It will not bring hydrogen or renewable natural gas into our homes. There will not be new gas pipelines, and there won't be a lot of new gas infrastructure, which is very much in some plans that the gas companies are making. Next slide. This is the postcard. As you can see, it's got dirty air and clean air. That's the front of the postcard. And then the back of the postcard, next slide. Oh, I should have mentioned there are 3 versions of the postcard. Well, maybe more, but because those of us in Boston, almost everybody in Boston gets their gas from National Grid. Many people in other parts of the state get their gas from Eversource. And obviously you want the postcard to go to the company that you're getting your gas from, or the company that your propane supplier is getting the gas from. That's a factor I hadn't run into until Cynthia asked. And then the back of the card, of course, is a little different because the CEOs have different names, but basically it makes the same statement that natural gas is a problem and we want clean air and clean heat. So next. This is just some of the ways that Mothers Out Front invites us to take part. The simplest is to sign this postcard. And I will be at church on Sunday with a bunch of postcards. But the postcards are at the moment a rare commodity. They've run out of postcards. And the campaign is still deciding whether to, yeah, right. They're still deciding whether to make more or not. They may shift the emphasis to the petition. So I'll keep you posted about that. But we do have some postcards and we would love to have a lot of people sign them. And the second step, of course, is to sign the petition. I think they're planning to make that almost entirely an online petition. And you can find it, as I said, at the link that we gave earlier, and you can find it on the website too. The next step would be to be a collector, to help us get more postcards signed and reach out to your friends to sign the petition, just as Sylvia did with the Boston action I asked her to support this morning. If you're willing to get emails saying we need letters to so-and-so because of such and such a bill that's coming up, or in the case of Boston, it was a city council ordinance that would make buildings define their plans for reducing emissions. That's a pretty easy lift as well, but I'm not going to send you those emails unless you invite me to. And then the next step, of course, would be and when you do that, if you're also willing to take the step of encouraging other people to do it, that's even better. It's always helpful to have quite a few people in a meeting with a legislator, and they're done by Zoom this day, or I think they will be, many of them will be by Zoom for some time to come. So easy to join in. If you don't, as I mentioned, I did mention that there are quite a few Mothers Out Front chapters in Massachusetts, and some of you who don't live in Boston do live near another chapter. So if you're be willing to join that kind of a meeting, I think you'd find it very interesting and rewarding. Mothers Out Front has one of their opportunities is something they call Action Hours. And basically, it's a climate action call once a month. They choose a topic. They give you information about why it matters and why Mothers Out Front is making particular recommendations. They give you a prepared script, and you all sort of go Zoom together and send off these emails or tweets or whatever the media they've chosen for that meeting is. And it's actually a lot of fun. I've done a couple of them, and it's informative at the same time. Of course, you're invited to learn more about Mothers Out Front. The website is an obvious place, although it's a little confusing to navigate sometimes. But they also have a welcome call. I think it's once a month, and that's a good way to get an overview of what's happening. And finally, if it works for you geographically, there's a party on Beacon Hill on September 30th. And if you're interested in learning about Mothers Out Front, you'd be very welcome at that party. But the key to all this, next slide, is to get in touch with me, and you all know how to do that. So that's not a problem. That's it for me. And I think over to, I've forgotten now whether it was Kent or Cynthia that was going to handle the questions.
Well, it's
or whatever
me.
happens next.
Betsy, thank you. That is there's so much information there. We had this plan to ask, the 60 or 70 people that were showing up today to write all their questions into the chat. So as not to bombard everyone. We do have one question, and that is, where is the fracking happening in Massachusetts? Is it happening in Massachusetts, Betsy? And then we'll just go to open questions. Yeah.
Dory knows more than I do, but no, to the best of my understanding, there's no fracking here. It's just that it's done in Pennsylvania or wherever and comes by pipelines primarily to Massachusetts. But I think, our distance only makes it worse in some ways because there are all those opportunities for gas to leak or to explode as it makes its way from Pennsylvania or wherever to us.
Kent.
If I were a gas company and I were hearing this petition, I'm curious as to what is the real recommendation for them other than get out of that business and do something else. Are there maybe Dory will have more to say about this, but I'm curious if there is anything they can be doing other than finding something else to do.
Dory, do you want to?
Dory, yeah, you're on mute.
Yeah. Let me say first that just as that doesn't answer your question at all, but I didn't mention the fact that the whole idea about the postcard campaign is to collect thousands of postcards and find some publicity getting way of delivering them. So it's really, I think, the campaign is in some ways kind of simplistic, but that's the point. It's to make the gas companies feel that people are paying attention and that they care. So that's kind of the context. But you're right. What they do next is a very complicated issue. And I'd love to hear what Dory would say.
Betsy, would this be a good time for me to tell my anecdote?
Yeah, why not?
Okay. I'll make this very quickly. I live in JP, as Betsy said. And like Beacon Hill, the area of JP I live in is very hilly. And there have been gas leaks here that one can smell constantly. So a neighborhood vigilante with the best of intentions kept calling National Grid because one of the leaks, she smelled a leak in front of our house. So we awakened one morning to have our whole front yard ripped up and National Grid trucks all over the place. The yard, literally, the grass, the trees, everything ripped up.
And they did have a great garden.
Yeah, we do again, but no thanks to National Grid. So we called to complain. To make a long story short, some bigwig whose name I cannot remember from National Grid came, and she was very, very nice. And she said, "Can I talk to you in private?" So I said, "Of course." And she said, "You can't use my name," which I won't do because I can't remember it. But she said, "This is an enormous problem, gas leaks, particularly methane leaks, all over the city, but particularly awful in Jamaica Plain and Beacon Hill." She said, part of the problem is National Grid is a British company. They don't really give a damn about what goes on in Boston. She was not British. And she said the other problem is the city of Boston will never give them a permit to do anything more than about a quarter of a block of repair. She said the only way it could really be fixed, even using the current gas, would be to rip up all the gas lines because they're also antiquated. And she, as Betsy said, she said, they're so full of leaks, it's not funny. And she said, when you smell gas, that's the best sign because that means it's a small leak. When it's a large leak, you don't smell anything.
Whoa.
So that was horrifying to me too. So I said, so you mean when I walk up and down the street and I don't smell anything? She said, yeah, that probably means there's gas all over the place. So, I mean, I don't know how this helps anyone, but it's just horrifying.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Howard. Thanks for sharing. Go, Dory.
No, that's a devastating story. That's really, really, really shocking to hear. I can't.
It is. And I mean, I was amazed she told me, but I think watching, pulling up to our house and seeing the whole yard destroyed prompted her to be honest.
Wow.
Anyway, I will mute myself.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I wanted to say something about Kent's question. There are 6 investor-owned gas companies in the Commonwealth, and then there's 4 municipal companies. The investor-owned companies at the core of their business model is their earnings from replacing pipe, because if you invest $1 a day and 30, 40 years, you recover the costs as the company, and you're earning a 10% rate of return. So in real dollars, you spend $1 today, and and it's the gas customers who pay for it. So their business model is really under siege by questioning natural gas, fossil gas. And if you're a company like NSTAR or Eversource that also sells electricity, I think you have more options. One important provision in the future of heat legislation, which Betsy mentioned, is a provision that would incentivize gas companies to sell renewable energy. And one possibility, particularly for dense urban areas, is for them to invest in geothermal. So that would involve drilling wells down and pumping warmer water up during the winter, and then the opposite during the summer. So there are 2 of the gas companies have geothermal demonstration projects. So you could imagine that would have a similar, you invest in an asset that you create and you get your returns from it. So moving that way is certainly one possibility. The extent to which that geothermal option is scalable, its scale, has yet to be determined. So I like economic history. It'd be cool to go back and see what happened to the coal companies. What happened, to the railroad companies? I mean, there was a lot of bankruptcies, and people, companies went out of business to make these huge system shifts. I suppose I've seen ideas where, gas companies would buy like the heat pumps and install them and maintain them for gas customers, that could be kind of a model. I mean, what they know how to do is bill you each month and tell you how much energy you've used and collect the money. So there may be some feedback, but there may be models where they can continue distributing some form of energy and earn money performing that set of services. I personally think I hope that there's more exploration of the concept of publicly owned energy systems, it's gas companies have not been big innovators, and what they really cared about is their balance sheets and their P&L. That's what I have to say about that.
I have a question, maybe kind of piggybacking on Kent's is I thought there was some legislation in place that is requiring the gas companies to come up with a plan that's for 30 years out and 50 years out it, to lower the emissions. And would that then be their opportunity to switch over and transition to a new fuel? Or can anyone answer? I don't have the answer to that. So that's the question.
Betsy described, it's called the DPU 2080. 2080 is just the docket number. From what I hear this week, I think there will be Boston Globe reporting about this program sometime this weekend. So stay tuned for that. But basically, the Attorney General petitioned the Department of Public Utilities saying, you've got to make a plan, come on. And so then DPU told the gas companies to hire a consultant to help them figure out, how they want to help with the 2050 net zero goals. But they aren't required by that petition to show how they're going to get to net zero. So there is a program with the Department of Environmental Protection, which has annually declining methane goals for the 6 investor-owned gas companies. I write about this in my report, but in my opinion, it's a very low bar that DEP has set, and the 3 biggest companies have not been able to meet their reduction goals. There is some wiggle room. There's a buffer of tons of methane which you can apply for if, for example, you expanded your gas distribution network this year, or you had a bunch of bad weather and so you can't meet the goal. So anyway, one of the things that astounds me about, on the one hand, in Massachusetts, we have progressive climate goals. And we have some bold goals for electrification, but then the Globe's been writing about how we're supposed to be doing, what is it, like 1,000 households a month, instead we're doing 300. We don't have any goals around decommissioning the gas structure. We don't have any goals that way. So there's a lot of work to be done.
I think learning about it, just preparing for this presentation, my sort of knowledge base was really expanded at talking to Betsy and Dory and the meetings we've had. I was very confused at first. Also, this false promise of natural gas, the article that I sent to some people as an attachment. It's very interesting and very good in simple language. And one of the things it mentions is the getting back to Howard's point. Is he still with us, Howard?
No.
He is the 80 fires and explosions in the Merrimack Valley from gas leaks that happened just last year, 2 years ago. 30,000 people injured, people killed. It sounds like what his the representative from the gas company was telling him, that's kind of the situation, and they don't know what to do about it at this point. So very interesting. Bill.
I think some of you won't be surprised. I have some friends that live on the other side, shall we say, and they tell me, I was talking about this with a couple of them recently. They're very deeply involved in major finance projects, and the gas and oil industry is having a lot of trouble getting big finance. I'm not talking about investments through shares, but project finance, because the banks are beginning to worry about the viability of these money makers over the next 20, 30 years. Because we're talking about financing. We're talking about billions of dollars of financing over decades. So Norway, where one of my pals is located, is having a big fight in their country. All their wealth really comes from gas and oil, and they're trying to get out, and they probably will. And I think that the major thing that can happen, and I think when you see a Royal Dutch Shell selling their holdings Permian oil basin to Conoco, that's a real signal that outside of the United States, the support for the gas and oil industry, really the financial support, is really waning. So I think it's important for us to foster divestment of investments in the shareholder level in anything related to gas and oil, plastics, et cetera, artificial fertilizers, and also to put pressure on the institutions that we interact with, the big investment banks and the big insurance companies, to also not fund these projects. And I think, as the funding dries up, going from billions of dollars to only a couple $100 million, but as the funding dries up and as the support of the big institutions behind the funding for these big institutions, these giant institutions in gas and oil go, I think that will give a real incentive for them to use their power positions to get into new ways of providing energy that really are environmentally friendly. It's not going to be a socially driven thing. They're not going to do it out of concern about the climate crisis, but they may do it because economically they look out ahead 10 or 20 or 30 years. And this game is almost over. We've got to get out. And in particular, BP, the company that ruined the Gulf, and Dutch Royal Dutch Shell are really already doing that, and they're really big players in Europe. And so I think the not financially supporting these companies is really a major thing. And you saw that Harvard announced, I don't know the details, but Harvard announced divestment from oil and gas. So these things, I think, these things are where these
Apparently have avoided using that term, but that's what it amounts to.
Yeah, but you don't know what that really means, and how fast they're going to do it. But they made an announcement, and McGibbon was happy. But I think that this is where these companies live. They live, in the money world. They don't live in the climate change world, and that's, I think, an important area of pressure for all of us in our little and big ways to put. And it seems to be having some effect already, which is very encouraging.
I think it was really important to hear that the reason that Larry Bacow made his report yesterday or the day before is 10 years of student protest and push and so forth. And that's sort of what we can do too for other places. It took a long time, but it finally paid off. And if Harvard does it, hopefully a whole bunch of other people will fall into line.
Stephen, go.
I'd like to offer a perspective that may shock some of you. I know we divested ourselves of oil and gas stocks at King's Chapel, but I'm actually thinking it might be a good investment, and I'll tell you why. I'm actually working with a group of investors now on some commercial scale geothermal. The regional scale or house scale, those kind of systems are great, but we have to come up with an alternative to produce electricity. And geothermal is literally everywhere. And we have the technology now to actually tap it. We also are improving on that technology. And the people that are key to us being successful in that regard are people who know how to drill.
Oh.
And the gas companies and the oil companies have that technology. They have that people. We can scale up very, very quickly. We just have to have a national will to push our resources to geothermal. We can have, like I said, it exists everywhere. The Earth's core is 6,000 degrees. Right below us here in Massachusetts, we have places that we can get to, boiling temperatures fairly fairly quickly, a kilometer or two. So that I think we're going to have something, because our wind and our solar, as great as that is, it isn't on all the time. And we don't want to also mine and create these big batteries that you have to replace as well. I mean, I think really the only logical solution and scalable and something we can do right away is geothermal. And frankly, it's the Exxons of the world that could help us get there. I'm actually involved in a company now. We're starting out in Colorado, because there's a lot of, essentially there's a lot of geothermal energy that's closer to the surface there. Plus, frankly, they've been doing a lot of the fracking and all that sort of the drilling processes out there. Also, water is also a big important thing out there. So we're combining geothermal with also water, as well as extraction of minerals from those waters, which makes batteries. So I think it's a pretty exciting world about there, and actually has given me more hope than almost anything, is the possibility of commercial scale geothermal.
Stephen, do you think there's any move by Exxon or any of the other big energy companies to have either a spin-off or a separate division that does geothermal? I bet
I don't know how
investors who would do that.
I don't know how smart they are, but as Bill suggested, if they can pivot, this is the place to pivot to, because they have the workers, they have the technology, and again, it's getting better. Now they can go down, drill, turn the drill, come back. They can essentially make closed loop systems, which is another advantage sometimes in that situation. And they're using, they're not just using water for the coolant, they're using high tech. It's actually CO2. It's liquid CO2, which is wonderful. So we'll be capturing CO2 to be used in those systems, because it actually carries heat much better than water fluids do. But the technology is changing rapidly. But again, we don't even have to change. We're already doing these, and we just have to invest. Get the country to invest in it instead of giving oil subsidies and et cetera. We've got to inject those funds into commercial scale geothermal. It exists everywhere, all over the world.
Stephen, will you keep us informed as you learn more about that, please? That sounds so interesting. My one question, not to be answered now, but everyone thought fracking was such a great idea, and there were so many side effects of fracking. And I'm just wondering if geothermal has any of those other side effects that would impact the environment.
Well, first of all, they have vastly improved their techniques for fracking, even when they do it for oil production. That they've improved the situation on that tremendously. But in this case, we're really just pretty much going down, pretty much straight down, and either with closed loop systems or not, pulling the water and fluids that are up through the system. There's actually a young lady has done who was an avid environmentalist, a tree hugger, she called herself. She recently did a TED talk about the possibilities. And the thing that I thought was so brilliant was this, we already have the ability to scale up with all these companies that already know how to drill.
Maybe you could get us a link to that TED talk or the woman's name. That would be interesting.
It's another link, but it's this one. I actually listened to it 3 times myself. It was done so well. Yeah.
Great. Those are good. Well, Betsy, what do you want us to do? Which of those items do you want us to do on your checkoff list so we can
all of them
others out front?
But I'll keep you posted about whether we get more postcards or not. But if you're coming to church, because if we do get more postcards, then it'll be easy to Oh, no, well, actually, we're going on beyond Mothers Out Front, and that's a good idea too. I would love to know who to alert with requests to be in touch with on a particular issue at a particular time. But I know that most of you already subscribe to several organizations, so I'm a little hesitant to just email you, except this Boston voter one seemed like one I should act on this morning. And the good news about the Berto, by the way, since I've got you, is that the Mothers Out Front person who's been tracking it sat in at the working session with the counselors and was very encouraged that the ambitious goals that Mothers Out Front supports seem to be making it into the final drafting.
Okay, great.
Dory?
Yes, Dory, unmute yourself.
I was going to say, in addition to these policy actions and public pressure things, I think I'm starting to figure out, well, how can I heat and cool my apartment here in Boston with a much smaller carbon footprint. So, for example, I have a gas stove, and I'm going to switch it out for an induction stove, and I have a new thing that's attached to the wall that heats the water and also burns natural gas to create heat in the winter. So I want to figure out, contractors that I can talk to about changing that. It would be, and then I live in an apartment building, and each unit has their own system. But you're going to see a lot more subsidies that are going to come to help people switch off. And obviously, some of us can afford to do that, and particularly if there's subsidies. The real concern is what lower income households are going to do, who perhaps have landlords who are not going to make this change because it's expensive, and households who cannot afford on their own to make these transitions. So the distributional issues are going to become important. But every person who makes a change in their own technologies in their own homes is helping by those actions.
Yeah. I think we heard recently, I don't know how many people got an email from Peter Sexton, all the things he's done to kind of get his house in order. And I think it would be interesting to ask other people to kind of share those ideas, just to kind of generate, I might talk to you, Dory, about how you're switching over and which stove you're going to buy, that kind of thing at that simple level.
Well, not to mention the fact that our church
Yeah.
should be thinking about these things.
And speaking of stoves, I want to mention that you can get a single burner induction. It's not a burner really, but an induction equivalent of a burner for something like $50. And we used one in the demonstration on Beacon Hill recently. I'm going to get one. I have a gas stove, but I don't, why not use that instead of the gas stove?
That's a great idea.
I mean, often you don't need more than one burner. So
My grandson has one out at his college. It's quite wonderful.
And
you don't burn yourself on it.
Yeah, exactly. We at the demonstration at the Beacon Hill Fest, we had a piece of paper on it. We had it there cooking a chocolate. People could make their own s'mores, so there was chocolate sauce, but there was a piece of paper underneath the pot. And if you have something messy, if it boils over, which I gather happens a lot when you're first learning to use it because it heats so quickly, you just pick up the paper or the wax paper or whatever and throw it out.
Great. Does
So
anyone?
All I'm saying is there's an
Yeah.
easy way to experiment for $50 or $75 or something. You can really find out what it's like.
Love that idea, Betsy. Does anyone else have any comments or thoughts before we kind of move into our wrap up here? Yes, Sylvia.
I'd like to ask a question, and it'll reveal my total ignorance. But if you wanted to heat your house, say, geothermally, could you?
Yes.
How?
If you have.
You're not going to drill down to the core of the earth. So how does
No.
Yeah.
As Dory said, for most domestic uses, if you can get to a spot of ground, you can drill down into the ground at 4 feet. It's about 52 degrees. And so you drill down and run your liquid through that 52 degrees, and you can use that to cool your house during the summertime and pre-warm the heat in your house for the winter time. So it's the magic of the ground temperature in this region. In most places, around 52 degrees. You have to go down quite a bit further to start getting into the higher temperatures. So it's very useful, but you do have to have some ground. We were looking at it at our parish house because we have access to our garden area, and we could put a geothermal system in there. So it is something that we're still thinking about for sure.
How much ground do you need?
Yeah. Wouldn't you still have a garden?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. No, they
I don't
have.
think we can do it in the south end. There's just too much water under us. But go on.
Oh, water is just fine. It doesn't. Yeah, it's because that water is going to be the same temperature, the same 52 degrees.
Okay.
But depending on, there are a number of systems. Some are you really only need a very, very small bit of yard. I mean, 10 square feet, and the pipes go out at an angle and come back to a head, and you gather it all there and into your heat pump in your house. So they can be very, very small systems. Doesn't work very well for us here in the city because you don't have access to any ground to put your heat pumps, but we could pull up the streets, take out the gas pipes, and use the streets for our geothermal well placing. So there's lots that could be done in that regard, and needs to be. And not only do you need the commercial scale thing so that you have electricity, dependable electricity particularly for peak loads, but then we can do it also at a small scale, like we're doing with solar cells and on residences as well.
Thank you, Steve. That's really interesting. So, and I think those heat pumps are, maybe $4,000 or $5,000 or something, 6,000, or if for an individual house. I was just looking on my phone. That's what I've been doing when I look down. The screen bothers my eyes, so I tend to look down anyway. So I was kind of researching heat pumps.
And back to Betsy, I mean, that's the kind of thing that our organization can do, is to be encouraging our legislators to underwriting or that activity, so that it's paid for 50% by the state, that sort of thing, so that we encourage people to do that and make those kind of investments that way, so that the mothers can do all kinds of things like that to encourage good legislation in that way, both on a kind of local scale, but also, and really the commercial stuff needs to be dealt with on the federal level. We really need to push that hard there.
Thanks.
Give some incentives, right? Speaking of incentives, Kent, do you want to move us to our final?
Well, Kathy just had her hand up, and we
Oh
haven't
yeah,
heard
Kathy,
from
we didn't
her,
hear
so-
from you. Please.
That's okay. Is anybody familiar with Clean Choice Energy?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm totally into solar and wind. I'm probably paying a little more. You can do it through a private company or through Eversource.
No, Kathy, you want to do it through the city of Boston?
I did.
Okay, good.
I did. When Eversource sent that
No,
out.
because there are companies that try to sound like the same thing, which will
Right.
give you a low rate and then scam you, jack.
Right.
They're
I've had
predatory.
that for a little while. It wasn't a
Right.
problem.
Yeah.
But then Eversource came out and was going to offer it to the entire city if you had electricity. And so my heat and my air conditioning comes from wind and solar. I don't know, if you live in the city of Boston,
Yeah, what happened is that the city made a negotiation to buy electricity collectively.
Yeah.
So we all have the choice of paying the minimum or
Mhm.
paying a higher rate. The middle position is more renewable than what you would normally get from Eversource. And then you also have the option of going for a higher level of renewable, which actually, if you heat with electricity like I do, I decided that might not be the best way to spend my climate change dollars. But
I'm doing.
It's a
That's what
very
we-
individual decision.
Everybody else-
I think this would be a great topic for another meeting. Because
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, including me, would be interested in hearing about
But
that.
Really?
I mean, there are some companies, there are good companies and bad companies outside of the city deal that we have. There are, you know, some companies are legit and some of them are just predatory.
Yeah.
Great. Great.
Okay, well, I think I'll share the screen for you want to do the last words, Cynthia?
Well, I think we're not quite there. We have a very important. Okay, so the third bullet. Oh, the next series, the next in our series is going to be October 19th,
Right.
and this will be Dory's presentation. And I think you know, our steering committee will meet. I think we're going to think of ways to really get the word out for this one and really line people up and perhaps get other churches informed so that they can come. We want to get the numbers up.
Yep.
So we don't have to tell you to join the mailing list. And do let us know if you want to be the champion for one of these initiatives to keep us going. The one on food and composting is one we're looking for someone to kind of head that up and kind of rally us along the way. So that's what we have coming up next. And then we're always going to try to keep the web page up to date. Now, yes, for the next, for the really important thing, write down this email address, bill@birdsandbeans.com. And by the end of tomorrow, send him your snail mail address and indicate whether you want dark, medium, light roast, or decaf, whole or ground coffee. And it will be roasted Thursday and shipped to you on Friday. Bill, thank you so much. This is such a nice. And I think at our next meeting, we're all going to be sitting there with our coffee mugs, you know, and we'll have to be.
And if any of you haven't yet tried Birds and Beans coffee, you will be happy.
Yeah, great. All right. I'm going to wrap us up with a wonderful reading that I came across today. Let me just find it. It's a excerpt from a poem by Mary Oliver. It's called Thirst, from her poem called Thirst. It's just a part of it. Oh Lord, grant me in your mercy a little more time. Love for the earth and love for you are having such a long conversation in my heart. And to that we'll say amen.
Amen.
And may we
Amen.
continue to listen that conversation in our hearts. Love for the Lord and love for our earth and our future and our children. And as we go forward together, and thank you so much, everybody, especially Betsy for your
Thank
presentation.
you, Betsy. Yeah,
And all of you for coming.
thank you.
See you soon.
Thank you.